Welcome back to Boss Economics World, where we slice through the government's economic nonsense like a hot knife through overpriced butter. I'm your host, the no-nonsense truth teller of the financial world, here to break down the latest economic dumpster fire. Buckle up, because today we're diving into President Donald Trump's wild 50% tariff threat on the European Union and a 25% smackdown on smartphones from Apple, Samsung, and anyone else daring to manufacture outside the US. This is a masterclass in government mismanagement, and we're gonna roast it like a marshmallow at a bonfire. Let's get into it. On May 23, 2025, President Trump took to Truth Social, because where else do you announce global economic chaos, and declared war on the EU with a 50% tariff on all imports starting June 1, 2025. Oh, and he didn't stop there. He's also gunning for a 25% tariff on smartphones from Apple, Samsung, and anybody that makes that product, unless they build factories in the US by the end of June. This isn't just a policy, it's a full-blown tantrum, and the markets are shaking in their boots. The S&P 500 dropped 0.7%, the Nasdaq 100 slid 0.9%, and Apple's stock took a 3% nosedive. Trump's reasoning? He claims the EU is slow-walking trade talks and unfairly targeting US companies with lawsuits and regulations. He's not wrong about the trade deficit, $236 billion with the EU in 2024, according to the US Commerce Department, but his solution is like using a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. He says these tariffs will force companies to move manufacturing to the US, creating jobs and closing the trade gap. Sounds patriotic, right? But hold your applause, because this plan is about to crash the economy harder than a bad TikTok trend. Let's start with the obvious, tariffs are taxes, and guess who pays them? Not the EU, not Apple, not Samsung, you, the consumer. Trump's waving away concerns about price hikes, claiming foreign companies will eat the costs or move production to the US. Dream on, Mr. President. Bloomberg Economics estimates these tariffs could slash US GDP by 0.6% and jack up consumer prices by 0.3%. That's $321 billion in US-EU trade getting hit with a wrecking ball. German cars, Italian olive oil, French wine, expect to pay through the nose or kiss them goodbye. Take smartphones. A 25% tariff on iPhones and Samsung devices could spike prices by 10–40%, according to posts on X. An iPhone 16 that costs $799 today could easily hit $1,000. And don't think Apple's going to eat that cost, they're already planning to shift some production to India to dodge Trump's earlier China tariffs. Moving to the US. That's a pipe dream. Building a factory here takes years and billions. Apple's supply chain is a global beast, with 200+ suppliers across Asia. The US doesn't have the skilled labor or infrastructure to compete overnight. And the EU? They're not sitting quietly. They've got €95 billion, $107 billion, in US exports, think bourbon, motorcycles, and soybeans, lined up for retaliatory tariffs. This tit-for-tat could spiral into a full-blown trade war, just like Trump's 2018 steel and aluminum tariffs, which cost US consumers $900 million a year in higher prices, per the Peterson Institute for International Economics. History's repeating itself, and the government's acting like it didn't see the script. Zoom out, and this tariff tantrum is just one piece of a government-orchestrated economic mess. Trump's administration is juggling a massive tax and spending package while threatening to tank global trade. Moody's predicts the federal debt will hit 134% of GDP by 2035, partly because of these tariffs choking long-term growth. The US economy was already wobbling. S&P Global's flash PMI showed a slight rebound to 52.1 in May 2025, but that's fragile when you're poking allies like the EU with a stick. Let's talk jobs, because that's Trump's big pitch. He says tariffs will bring manufacturing back to the US, creating millions of jobs. Sounds great, but it's economic fairy dust. The American Action Forum found that Trump's 2018 tariffs killed 166,000 US jobs by raising costs for manufacturers who rely on imported parts. A 50% tariff on EU goods could make it impossible for US firms to source affordable components, think car parts from Germany or machinery from Italy. Andy Abbott, CEO of Atlantic Container Line, nailed it. A big tariff on European imports will backfire, making American products more expensive to produce. Then there's inflation. The Federal Reserve's already fighting to keep prices in check, with core inflation hovering at 3.2% in Q1 2025, per the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Tariffs will pour gasoline on that fire. Higher costs for imported goods mean higher prices for everything: groceries, cars, electronics. Retailers like Walmart won't eat the costs, they'll pass them on. Trump himself admitted it, sometimes it'll be something extra. Gee, thanks for the heads up. Now, let's get to the real villain, government incompetence. Trump's team claims these tariffs are about leverage, not destruction. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said they're meant to light a fire under the EU. But this isn't negotiation, it's economic Russian roulette. The EU's trade chief, Maro Sefcovic, called for mutual respect, not threats, and he's right. The EU offered a deal to cut tariffs to zero, but Trump stuck on a 10% baseline tax. Why? Because he's more interested in flexing than fixing. This isn't just about Trump. The entire system's complicit. Congress is too busy bickering over tax cuts to rein in this trade chaos. The Commerce Department's Howard Lutnick admitted negotiations with the EU are impossible because of internal EU politics. Meanwhile, the White House is ignoring data screaming that tariffs hurt more than they help. The Tax Foundation estimated that Trump's earlier tariffs reduced U.S. GDP by 0.2% and cost 142,000 jobs. Yet here we are, doubling down on the same failed playbook. And let's not forget the timing. The U.S. economy is still recovering from the 2024 supply chain shocks, with container shipping costs up 30% year-over-year, per Freightos data. Throwing tariffs into the mix is like tossing a Molotov cocktail into a fireworks factory. The EU's already planning countermeasures, and countries like Ireland and the Netherlands are sounding the alarm. Irish PM Michael Martin called the tariffs enormously disappointing, and Dutch PM Dick Schoof promised a robust response. This isn't leadership, it's a government setting fire to its own house. For the everyday American, this is a gut punch. Higher smartphone prices hit your wallet directly. $200 more for an iPhone means less money for rent or groceries. Small businesses get crushed too. The National Federation of Independent Businesses reported that 60% of small manufacturers rely on imported materials. A 50% EU tariff could bankrupt firms that can't absorb the cost. And don't expect new factories to pop up overnight. The U.S. lost 5 million manufacturing jobs between 2000 and 2015, per the Economic Policy Institute, and rebuilding that capacity takes decades, not months. Professionals in finance, you're not off the hook. The market's already spooked. Apple lost $70 billion in market cap in a single day. The VIX Volatility Index spiked 15% on May 23, 2025, signaling investor panic. If you're managing portfolios, good luck hedging against this mess. Gold prices are up as investors flee to safe havens, and the dollar's down 0.5%. This is what happens when a government plays chess with a sledgehammer. Here's the kicker, Trump thinks he's playing 4D chess, but he's just knocking over the board. His art of the deal is more like the art of the disaster. He's telling Apple to build in the US, but the US doesn't even make smartphones, zero, zilch, nada. He's telling the EU to shape up, but the EU's offering deals while he's throwing tantrums. This is government mismanagement at its finest, promising jobs and prosperity while delivering higher prices and global chaos. And the irony? Trump's tariffs are hitting allies harder than adversaries. His aides claimed the goal was to isolate China, but the EU's facing worse tariffs than Beijing. German economist Marcel Fratzscher called it, the EU should have teamed up with China to counter this madness. Instead, we've got a president tweeting economic policy like it's a reality show cliffhanger. Tune in next week for Tariff Apocalypse, Season 2. Trump's 50% EU tariff and 25% smartphone tax are a masterclass in how to tank an economy while pretending to save it. Consumers face higher prices, businesses face supply chain nightmares, and markets are in freefall. The government's not just asleep at the wheel, they're flooring the gas toward a cliff. For you, the viewer, whether you're pinching pennies or managing millions, this is a wake-up call. Demand better from your leaders, because this tariff circus is coming for your wallet. That's all for today's Boss Economics World. If you're as fed up with this economic clown show as I am, smash that like button, subscribe, and share this video. Let's call out the nonsense together. Until next time, stay sharp, and keep your money safe from government shenanigans.